Hey, it's Alan, and I just wanted to let you know that you can now listen to the ongoing history of new music early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime.
I once had a conversation with Don Letts, one of the guys who followed the rise and fall of The Clash back in the day. He has a theory. He says that the average useful lifespan of a band is about 7 or 8 years. Their career starts with them rising out of nowhere, running on nothing more than adrenaline and passion. At some point around year 4 or 5, they peak. But after that, though, things begin to fall apart. Personalities conflict. Artistic baggage starts to interfere with the development of new ideas. Money problems, girlfriend problems, drug problems. And this leads to the inevitable breakup. Now, The Clash certainly followed that template. So did the Beatles and the Smiths. And Nirvana was right on schedule until Kurt ended things rather dramatically. But then there are the exceptions. Pearl Jam. They've existed since 1991. Radiohead started in 1989. U2 has been around since 1976. Same with The Cure. When it comes to Canadian bands, there's Finger Eleven. Their history dates back at least 20 years. 5440 goes all the way back to 1981. Teenage Head had been around since 1975 before singer Frankie Venom died last year. I guess what I'm getting at is that many of us can't imagine a world in which some of these bands do not exist. I mean, they've always just sort of, been there for us. Also in this mix is Sloan. They were formed in 1991. Now, can you imagine a Canadian rock scene without Sloan? Can you remember a Canadian rock scene that didn't feature Sloan? It's tough, isn't it? And I think it's time to let them tell their story. In their own words, too.
This is the Ongoing History of New Music podcast with Alan Cross.
Come home for good.
Sloan from their 1996 album One Chord to Another, Everything You've Done Wrong. Welcome again, I'm Alan Cross, and this is a show on how a record store clerk, a saxophone player born in Northern Ireland, a former provincial high school high jump champion, and a model for Winnie the Pooh sleeping bags in the Eaton's catalog came together to become one of this country's most enduring rock bands. I had a chance to sit down with Chris Murphy and Jay Ferguson of Sloan so they could tell their band's life story, and the results were pretty cool. For example, let's just start with this. Which of the guys got to model the Winnie the Pooh stuff? It was Chris.
I did. As a kid, I modeled Winnie the Pooh sleeping. Well, I was in the Eaton's in the Sears catalog, and a couple of commercials. Schneider's Bacon. There's the one of me taking the bacon off the table. And in 1855, James Schneider used only top quality meats, and then I'm the kid who steals the bacon. That ran for about 5-6 years.
Just like Eddie Vedder. He was a child model, too. He even ended up in a long-forgotten Canadian film called The Silent Partner. All that before he got out of grade 1. And just so we can fill in all the blanks, Patrick Pentland was the guy who was born in Northern Ireland. He also lived in Jamaica before his family finally settled in Sackville, Nova Scotia. Jay Ferguson was the record store clerk. It was a second-hand shop in Halifax. And drummer Andrew Scott was the former holder of several provincial track and field records in Nova Scotia. He was also voted one of Canada's 20 sexiest musicians. Before there was a Sloan, there was a bunch of other bands, all from the Halifax area, starting with a group called Carney Lake Road.
Very obscure. I don't expect anyone to know it. Jay and I were both in it.
That's right.
I've been playing with Jay since '87. We're from Halifax. We came up, played the Rivoli, to no one, mind you.
Interviewed by Erica M.
It was very exciting. For
Indie Street on Much Music, which I think was on at 3 a.m. on Sunday nights.
And so we came home with VHS in hand. We were proof we were on Much Music, and we were just the kings. I think there was a ticker tape parade.
Yeah, I think so.
Halifax
Someone
was not
was
that happening at the time.
Then there was a band called Blackpool. Here's a story about how producer Terry Brown, a guy who worked with Rush on some of their biggest records, ended up working with them.
Blackpool was a whole thing without me. I'm not to distance myself, but I wasn't really the person that put that band together. But I did learn a lot in that band. They split the money equally and stuff, and something that we do too. And they had some good songs. It was more kind of a roots rock band, but at the time I was still into hardcore basically, and I thought it was kind of uncool to be in that band. Looking back now, I think actually the record that I played on, which was called We the Living, was actually pretty cool. I joined that band because Terry Brown was coming to town. He wanted to record a band and get a bunch of nerds to come in and pay $100 each to watch him work, kind of thing, one of these things. And so I'm playing bass, and we played live off the floor, and it's like, that's perfect, we're going to redo the bass. And so I had to come into the to the record booth with him, surrounded by nerds, and just playing, sweating my ass off. But I was letting strings ring, so as I was playing, Terry Brown had to mute every string I wasn't playing, and all I could think of, he's recorded with Geddy Lee. This is the worst moment of my life. And every time I tried to play something other than the root, he would say, no, just footballs. And so I still use that to this day. Footballs, just hanging on the root. Terry Brown, awesome. And I asked him a bunch of Rush stories, and he kept saying that he wasn't interested in talking about Rush. He just wanted to talk about that he had been there when The Who recorded Substitute, and I think he was there for the Trogs recording Wild Thing. Anyway, there's some history.
Here's the track Chris is talking about, Blackpool with We the Living.
She says, yeah, it was easy to do, but not so easily done. I was as wrong as she was, but at least I kept my mouth shut about it. Today the rain falls on me, 21 weeks, how long could that be? Journeyman, the journey's over, bitter man, and you're getting colder. Today the rain falls on me, 21 weeks, how long could that be?
The pre-Sloan band called Blackpool. Now, here's how Sloan itself came together.
Kearney Lake Road was over.
That's
I
right.
almost beat up Jay on stage at the art school. He's being such a jerk.
Yeah,
You want to
sorry.
relive that?
No, that's fair point.
Anyway, in the meantime, I started playing with Andrew and another fella. We played around town. And then Andrew was visiting in Toronto. Jay and I said, you know what? When Andrew gets back, we're going to make a band, the three of us. And we tried to come up with some band names and stuff. This is 1990. Andrew was away, I think. And he came back
Right.
like for Christmas.
Yeah.
And we started playing together, the three of us. And we were trying to figure out who we'd get for a fourth person. None of us knew Patrick very well, but we knew that he was in a band called Happy Co. And I knew that he could play guitar, and I knew that he could sing. And I was the guitar player at the time. I was like, yeah, we need a bass player. And within about a year, I was demoted, I guess, to bass, because Patrick was actually better than I am. But it was the worst mistake we ever made, because now he's always above the 27th fret, playing some
Just football, man.
some
Just
ridiculous-
football.
just footballs. Where's Terry Brown when you need him?
Okay, Sloan is an odd name for a band, so where did that come from?
It's funny you should ask. Jay has a great story about that.
Sloan was he was a bass player in a band from New Brunswick. They're
No.
called the Straight Jackets. No, they're from.
They lived in Bedford.
Okay, yeah, Bedford. But that was sort of in New Brunswick as far as I was
No, it
concerned.
was not. But actually,
It was part of the suburbs.
They were the band that Kearney Lake Road went on tour on. They were the headline act. Straight Jackets was what they were called. They had a record out. It was very exciting. They had a vinyl record on DTK Records, and that came out in about 1989 or something.
That's right. Yeah, they were superstars as far as I was concerned.
Yeah, they actually had a record, and
Their bass player, his nickname, he worked, I think for a while, they eventually moved to Montreal, and he worked like in a warehouse or something like that, and his French boss used to call, the bass player, Jason Larson, they used to call him Slow One, and with a French accent, it just turned into Sloan, like whatever. I mean, that doesn't sound French, but he ended up with that nickname.
bonjour.
I don't want to brag. But anyhow.
We stole
so it
his
was-
nickname,
His
basically.
nickname became Sloan, and then we stole his nickname.
And his
it's kind
face
of boring, eh?
is on the cover of our first release, which was the Peppermint EP.
Peppermint EP, that's his face, yeah.
The face of Jason Larson, a.k.a. Sloan.
But also it's the name of Ferris Bueller's girlfriend in the movie Ferris Bueller's
Yes,
Day
it is,
Off.
and it's also the name of the urinals that often
Unfortunately, yes.
that we all pee in, that a lot of us pee in, but it has nothing to do with us. Although, quick aside, the Sloan Valve Company that makes the toilet flushers and the urinals, some kid in Chicago, where this company is based, invited one of the people from that company to our show, and there's a picture of us they brought us like a flusher, and us giving them a bunch of records. There's a picture, the fanzine sort of set that up.
She's obviously a person with the cause. I told her that I don't smoke or drink. She told me to loosen up. I'm on her way to the LC. She skips her classes and
The original version of Underwhelmed from Sloan's debut release, which was called the Peppermint EP, I don't know about you, but the first time I ever heard that word was in that song. Did they invent it?
I actually think it was a word the whole time, but I hear it from time to time, and sometimes nobody really uses it to me. Every time I hear it, I go, huh? But so I hear
right,
it.
I hear
it
some people, when they mention it, and I expect them to look at me and go, but when they don't, then I'm like, oh.
But really,
I'm
what they're
embarrassed.
doing is they're calling me because I wrote it. Anyway, whatever.
That's right.
So we have underwhelmed, overwhelmed. Is anybody just whelmed?
When I met Jay, I think that was a state that I got nothing.
How boring. Next.
Sorry. Sorry, I tried.
It was around this time that the band decided to form their own record label.
Basically, we had already sort of been talking to Geffen, or DGC in the United States, about our band being signed to their label. We had already made a record in Halifax in a house. So there was sort of a record to go, but just because of red tape and major labels, it takes a long time. They're like, well, maybe we'll put it out in the fall of 1992, or no, we'll put it out early 93, and we're like, oh, this is spring of 92, basically. So we were itching to have something out. So basically we thought, well, you know what, we want to release some songs that are going to be on the album and some that aren't, and just put it out on our own so that we can tour and play shows instead of waiting another 3/4 of a year. So that's why we started Murder Records, was just to put out that EP. And then there was other bands that we knew of that we were friends with, and also our co-manager at the time, Peter Rowan, was also involved with managing, like Eric's Trip and Hardship Post. And we eventually put out their records as well.
Now this brings us to the point where Sloan suddenly found themselves being courted by Nirvana's record label. A story about how that happened is next. Welcome back, I'm Alan Cross, and we're listening to Chris Murphy and Jay Ferguson of Sloan tell the band's history in their own words. How, for example, did a little indie band from Nova Scotia end up signing to Nirvana's record label?
We made a recording in a house, and it was coming up to the East Coast Music Awards. Do you know what that is? Like out on the East Coast, and there's like some people from different labels come out there. And I think we were going to set up our own show at an art gallery. It was kind of like not official showcase. We were just going to set up our own show, and wanted to invite some people from different record labels who were coming. I found the name of this guy, Cam Carpenter, who used to do A&R at MCA here in Canada back before it was Universal. And I sent him a cassette with 3 or 4 songs on it, and just said, hey, here's our band, we like Sonic Youth, and like as if we're really cool. And he came to see us play, and then we ended up playing another show there as well. And then another guy, he told his friend Rick Arboit, who worked at Network, to come, hey, check out this band, he liked our tape. And his hands were tied. I don't think he could do anything in Canada at MCA for us, and he sent it to a friend of his, Todd Sullivan at Geffen, who loved the song Underwhelmed, and then came to see us play, and then was like, do you guys want to sign to Geffen? And we're like, holy crap. And this all happened so quickly. And in the meantime, we had been offered a deal by Network Records, which when that was coming off the fax machine, it was hard not to just sign it right away, because nothing happens like that to bands from Halifax, let alone Canada, especially for DGC. But for a band from Halifax,
And it was Nirvana's label. It was Sonic Youth.
We loved those bands, like Teenage Fan Club, and like Nirvana, Sonic Youth. It was.
We were aware of
it was
sort
shocking,
of, you're supposed to be on an indie first, and then you go. We knew the Nirvana story. We knew what college radio was and how you're supposed to do it properly. But because Geffen was calling, it was like, well, what would we be waiting for if we could be on Geffen now? So it was like the coolest place in the world to be. Well, I guess we couldn't really tell, once we started hanging out in Toronto more, we could tell what was actually happening. In Halifax, it's so small, we really knew everybody who was into cool music. We could name them by name. And I guess there was a steady flow of college kids that came through that we didn't know everybody, but we weren't really getting played on the radio or anything out there. Really, not then. We've had some radio support since, but it was all college radio and all very small time seeming at the time. But it was very exciting. And when we signed to Geffen, it was insane. There was we toured on a tour bus. The tour bus came into town, and it was as if it dwarfed all the buildings as it was. Halifax is small, so we were king for a while there in Halifax. But we really tried to be gracious about it, and really tried. Part of the expanding Murder Records and putting out other records was an effort to be a part of the community where we were, all of a sudden our aspirations changed to being national or international. But before it was we wanted to be the coolest band in town. And so we were trying to do that, but at the same time trying to still be friends and connected to all of of the scene, which had existed before, Ground Zero when we were signed. Like there was a prehistory to all that too.
But it was nice to be able to try and share the opportunity that we'd been given, like bring those bands on tour with us or put their records out.
It was a real communal sort of thing happening back then.
It was awesome.
Eric's Trip, I guess, you did a split 7-inch with him.
That's right. Eric's Trip were cooler than us, but no, there were a lot of great bands in this band. Hardship Post, they were the best live band. They were insanely good. And Thrush Hermit, who gives you Joel Plaskett now, and those guys were kids. They were 16 or whatever, and I don't know how much we had to do with their thing, but they were just young kids, and we gave them an opportunity maybe to put out a record that they mightn't have otherwise had.
And brought them on tour and stuff like that.
But got a lot of press and stuff. It was a totally exciting time.
Sloan from their second record, Twice Removed, which sounded substantially less fuzzy and more poppy than the first couple of records. Why?
Well,
I would say it was. I feel it was almost maybe from my perspective, it was a little bit of a result of touring Smeared. We toured that record for so long. It was kind of just the sound du jour. Like I think a lot of the records that really influenced us for Smeared was, sort of the best parts of Nirvana, but also the best parts of what was going on in England at the time, like My Bloody Valentine and Ride and all those sort of noisy pop bands that were on Creation Records and everything. And then I think that sound we'd sort of been maybe wanted to do something different, and everything that was on radio at that time was Smashing Pumpkins or just really loud guitars. And maybe it was a career suicide to try and take a different turn on Twice Removed, which was quieter guitars, more. I think some of the records we were listening to more were like Fleetwood Mac or the third Velvet Underground album, which is sort of quieter records, And I think we wanted
Plastic Ono Band.
What's that? Plastic Ono Band, yeah. And like more Beatles came out on that record too. So I think it was more just trying to distance ourselves from what was just becoming a pile of the same stuff.
But then that album becomes one of the favorite Sloan albums in the entire discography. I mean, everybody still goes back to Twice Removed saying that that's one of your one or two best ever.
Oh, it's nice to hear.
I have my own sort of. We argue about this.
No, but I agree.
But I say I think partly because it was career suicide and that we failed miserably financially, like everything fell apart. I think people love to get behind that. It's like, yeah, this is the record you don't know. Everybody knows Smeared. I know Twice Removed, but it's gone on to sell probably as many as Smeared. But
right.
But I think it was probably seen as a daring move or something, or that we somehow, because it is true that Geffen, when they heard it, they were like, are you serious? Like, this is a different band. It's going to be hard for us to market you. Please, consider redoing the whole thing. And then we stood our ground. So that's a good story, because it makes it sound like we're sticking it to the man or whatever. But it was also sounds great and was made in Lenny Kravitz's studio. It was all
with his analog board.
Yeah, with all that Beatles gear and all that stuff. It was all very exciting and expensive. For years, like our first record cost $1,200, then the second record cost $120,000, then the next record cost $8,000. It's like that was all of that cost more than the first 3 or 4 records combined.
After Twice Removed, things began to they began to fall apart. This was when the breakup rumors started. On April the 1st, 1995, a story was carried on the newswire. Sloan disbands. Halifax grunge pop sensation may be calling it quits. Band manager Chip Sutherland says there's an element of truth to the rumors, that the band feels that Geffen Records hasn't adequately promoted their album in the United States. Drummer Andrew Scott's relocation to Toronto has also made it difficult to work as a group. But Sutherland says the real reason the 4 members of Sloan are contemplating breaking up is they're not certain they want to continue to live under a big label contract. Under Sloan's contract, Geffen has until March to exercise their option for 2 more albums. Band members are giving themselves until then to decide if they want to continue as a group. Now, that sounded serious. At a show in Halifax, Chris Murphy even announced that this was going to be Sloan's last show. And it was, for a while. Everyone went off to do something else. Chris toured with a band called the Super Friends. Andrew had a few gigs with bands called the Sadies and Maker's Mark. Jay spent some time working at Murder Records and co-managed the Inbreds. And Patrick, he worked on his songwriting. What was going on?
Well, what actually happened at the end of Twice Removed, at the end of 1994, we basically said we were breaking up, and we got all this press out of the fact that, are they breaking up or not? It was like this whole a real story. As a band that was broken up, we were on Geffen and we were signed to something like 6 records or something like that, which is not really in our favor. It meant that that anything we would do after the band, it means that Geffen would have first right of refusal on, which puts us in a bad position. Anyway, we didn't want to say that we were breaking up because it meant that there would be a new set of rules applied to us as a broken up band and a band that was still together. And so we were telling Geffen we're not broken up because we didn't want to be basically screwed over contractually. But we had broken up basically, and we were kind of running Murder Records and putting out other records from our area. And then just over the course of the next year, we weren't really fighting, we were just frustrated with things. And we decided, you know what would really help Murder Records if we did another Sloan record? So we was like, okay, well then we have to go back and tell Geffen we're not broken up. So we went back to Geffen and they said that they were interested in putting the record out. And I was frustrated because I didn't feel like they were actually very interested at all. And we were very close to, I think there are even, did you end up with a printed version of a Geffen record of One Chord to Another?
I don't think
Do they exist?
I don't know.
If they do, they'd be very nerdily rare. But we were very close. But in the end, Geffen was just cool. Like, first of all, they made tons of money, so they didn't really need us, but they were really artist friendly and cool, and they said, just go, we're not going to hold you to your contract. And we signed to this other label called The Enclave, which was short-lived, which was set up to be really good. It had like Bell and Sebastian, like the Water Boys, and there was this boutique label with tons of money. It was Tom Zutaut, the guy who was the mentor of Todd Sullivan, who had signed us to Geffen originally. So I think that he had a bit of a mandate. He was going to I'm going to make these guys, I'm going to show Geffen, I'm going to make these guys a big hit. Anyway, that label went under in about 6 months. So we didn't have a lot of luck with the American label. So we weren't on Geffen anymore, and we were on The Enclave. The Enclave goes under. Now it's 1997, and we've recorded Navy Blues. So we just put it out ourselves. The next couple of records we just put out ourselves in the States and in Canada. We're on Murder Records the whole time in Canada after the two Geffen records. One Chord to Another, is on Murder Records in Canada, and then we get the rights back in Canada to Smeared and Twice Removed. So we have the whole catalog on Murder Records. Thank you very much. And never really had a real boost in the States after that, I would argue.
Don't you start, yeah, don't you start, don't you start.
Sloan with The Lines You Amend from their One Chord to Another album. Here's a weird thing about that record. All four members of Sloan never appeared in the same studio together while making that entire record. Chris, Jay, and Patrick did all the instrumental parts in Toronto and then sent the tapes to Andrew in Halifax. He'd find a studio, add all the drum parts, and then send the tapes back to Toronto. 1996 ended up being a pretty good year for Sloan. They won a Juno. Chart magazine named Twice Removed as the #1 Canadian album of all time, and Underwhelmed was picked as the #2 Canadian song of all time. Although it didn't sell tons of copies in the United States, the CD did help the band strengthen their fan base. Rolling Stone magazine reviewed the album, and they gave it a very respectable 3.5 out of 5 stars. They played a series of high-profile gigs, too. The bad news, as Chris said earlier, is that this new U.S. label called The Enclave went out of business. The good news is that Sloan successfully fought to stay independent. They also got the rights to their music back, which, as you heard, is something the band is pretty proud of. With the exception of the double record Never Hear the End of It and the live album 4 Nights at the Palais Royale, Sloan albums tend to be short and sweet. A long Sloan record is 45 minutes, but the average is somewhere around the, high 30s. Their 9th studio record was their shortest, at just over 37 minutes. They called it Parallel Play. Here's Chris Murphy and Jay Ferguson.
Well, Parallel Play, I'll start you with the title, is a reference to a child psychology term about children between 1 and 3 that play beside each other, but they don't interact. So it's sort of a joke on the way that the band sort of maybe behaves either on stage or off.
I mean, everybody, like I said, sings and writes in the band, and often sometimes there'll be, like Andrew, for example, will probably play all the instruments on his own songs. So anyway, they're kind of solo songs. But that's kind of the way we've worked for a long time. But I think it's a good term, and it kind of applies to this record because we had to make it kind of quick. And so everybody just, I know how to play the guitar on my own song, I'll just do it. So there's not a lot of, there is collaboration to a point, but I think the title is pretty apt.
But yeah, Regulation, back to 12 songs, mostly just because...
13 songs, yeah.
13, yeah. Because, you know what I mean. We could have spent more time. Last time we wanted to have a record out at a certain time, And then just because of some stuff that was going on, we had to push it back, and then we just kept recording, and we just decided to put it all out. I've been threatening to do a double album since 1998. I consider Navy Blues and Between the Bridges almost a double album because they were done close together at the same place, and I only wrote one new song for this new record. It was as if it was a double record to me. It'll be reissued as a double record.
No.
So we are back to our sort of egalitarian, like everybody sort of had 4 songs that they were working on, and at some point we decided we were running out of time and money, and we just, we'll make it 3 each, 12-song record, but Andrew wouldn't. He's like, I'm doing 4, I don't care what you get. Even though the record was mastered, he's still mixing his songs, like, no, wait for me, and even though we could have sent it off and met our deadlines, he's like, nope. No, I'm just kidding. Well, it's true, but I'm not angry about it. And we're just learning how to play it now, and I like it. Well,
imagine that for our last album, 30 songs. It was like, well, we got to go on tour, boys. I got to learn 30 songs.
But we tried to learn. We learned. We were routinely playing 22 or something. New songs.
No, we were able to do it. But you're right. It's like most bands know how to play the record, and then they go make the record. But we're opposite. Like, I basically have to go buy the record to learn how to play the album. Go home and listen to it.
But ever since Andrew, we grew up in Halifax, and Andrew moved to Toronto in 1993. So ever since then, it's been sort of like that. Sort of got to the point where we encouraged everyone to sing and write and contribute creatively, and to keep the band together, split the money equally, another good thing to do. So we've all kind of evolved into this band that writes sort of individually. There's a bit of, like, Jay and I will play each other our demos and talk about it and stuff.
We have our own practice space that we recorded our last album, Never Hear the End of It, the 30-song opus, and the new one, Parallel Play, we recorded them at our rehearsal studio, yeah. So we have our own studio.
Compare that to the $120,000 on the second album, right?
Well,
Yeah,
this is the thing,
yes.
yeah. Well, I wouldn't have spent that much money at the time, but it was someone else's money. It's one of those major label things. The first record we made, which was on Geffen, we made with the aspirations of trying to make 1,000 CDs or 500, and then it got picked up and remixed by Geffen. So, that cost us $1,200. I like to make everything on the cheap so that it can be seen as a success. Well, how many records did it sell? Well, how much did it cost? Because, we only sold X amount of records, but we made it for nothing. But not so little money that it's not good. Yeah, how boring.
Oh yeah, say what you want. It's all a shame to me. Look out for yourself. Believe in me.
Sloan with Believe in Me, the first single from their 2008 album Parallel Play. So, Sloan's been around since 1991. 9 studio albums, the live record, the greatest hits collection, the videos, the DVDs, the rarities, the bonus tracks, the tours. Now what? Here's Chris Murphy.
Our plans are to keep working. Sometimes I remember in 1999, it felt like we hadn't gone up, like we're playing the same places across Canada, like we're sort of going up a little bit, and then we were playing the same places, and I was frustrated. I was like, how come we're not getting any bigger? We're better than all these crap-ass bands, and we weren't getting any bigger. But then I sort of changed my tune to, at least we're still playing to anybody, because a lot of the bands that we started with, we were given a major leg up by signing to Geffen, and we had a lot of press in Halifax to Seattle and all that baloney. Like, it was, that whole story basically belonged to us. There were a lot of bands that maybe benefited from it, but they always got saddled basically by being little buddies of ours. And so we've been very fortunate. And so we're happy to just be still a band and still playing, and no one's really screwed up, and we're built to last. We'll last forever. Why wouldn't we just record it on our practice space? Come back, talk to you. Provided nothing happens to you, we'll be back here in 10 years.
I got no place to go.
Just to have an enormous body of work so that Mojo magazine finally goes, we are sorry. We never wrote about you guys, and you guys are unbelievable, and you have all this stuff, and nobody knows.
But Mojo Magazine or Record Collector Magazine, exactly the publications that would do something like that, especially if you collected everything in a box set.
Now you're talking.
We'll get to work on that.
You know what? If we had a huge hit, I have great ideas for repackaging and reissuing everything. But until then, I don't know if it's worth, the audience, I think, would be too small to warrant a ridiculous box set and coffee table book. But I have enough. We have everything, and we own everything, and we're ready to go on that.
Well, thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate it. I know that we're going to hear something from the new record.
Yes.
You're going to play something live here?
Yes.
Yeah.
And what's the song called?
We're going to do a song called Living the Dream. And it's a song that Patrick says he can't even say the word out loud because he thinks it's something that jocks say. He says you might as well have called the song Hurtin' Unit. But I don't think jocks say it.
So who
and
wrote,
I hate jocks.
Who wrote this?
I did.
Okay, so you're going to play your song.
Well, we're going to play it together.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, I appreciate you coming. Good luck with the new
Thanks
record
for
and
having us.
everything. Thanks for coming by, and we'll do this again sometime.
Making history so that we can report on it.
Jay, would you play along with me while I sing a song called Living the Dream?
I would love to.
Okay, well, let's do it.
1,
2, 3, 4.
All seem to happen so fast. Would you ever believe the way he passed?
The live record, 4 Nights at the Palais Royale, was a peak for Sloan. Their second real peak since they were formed in 1991. It was up, then it was down, and then up again. So where did things go from here? Well, do you have to ask? Well, don't worry, it all works out in the end. We'll cover everything. Plus, we'll get to some exclusive live acoustic recordings on part 2 of this history of Sloan as told by them. Thanks to Natalia, Andrew, Adam, and Mike for help with this show. And thanks obviously to Chris and Jay from Sloan, too. And Rob Johnson, who's in charge of technical production. We'll see you next time for part 2. I'm Alan Cross.
You've been listening to the Ongoing History of New Music podcast with Alan Cross. Subscribe to the podcast through iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and everywhere you find your favorite podcasts.